It's very easy to look at objects as pieces of art, while other cultures look at them as pieces of their heritage, culture, their spirit, their gods, and you have to take this very seriously, and you can't just lump everything together. I mean, you look at things like Hopi masks and things like that, which are real living beings to the Hopi. Those things should not be on exhibit. you know
Well, you're so right. I mean, and look at the objects that are behind me. I mean, every single work, yes, it's a beautiful work of art, but there's a meaningfulness to every single pot. Every single design has a meaning
Yes.
that is important to that living culture. And for all of us, it's a gift for us to learn that and celebrate that and take such learning and continue that inquisitiveness and knowledge to that next level of respect.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the key. It is respect. That we can't understand all that other cultures know, and and there's things that we don't get to know and shouldn't get to know. That's part of their religion and part of what their makes them who they are, and they want to keep those sacred. They want to keep them to themselves. I get it. They should. So we have to respect that, and as museum entities and as gallery owners, we have to respect that and be careful of certain things that we should and shouldn't handle. And that makes sense. That's interesting that you are the groundbreaker for NAGPRA, because it really did change the way I think not only museums look at things, but collectors and dealers as well. Yeah.
Well, I don't take the credit, but I certainly say that it was the most exasperating 3 years of my life.
I bet. I bet you got a lot of blowback from a lot of museums.
There were times which I was questioning whether I should be the one that turned my key in my car on. Yeah, there was a lot of concern by a lot of my peers that I was giving away the farm.
Yeah.
And of course, that wasn't what it was about.
Yeah.
It was all about relationships. Yeah. Bottom line, one single word, it was about relationships.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And now, of course, they've all bought into it and have valued in their own institutions from what has subsequently been the changes that we all have seen. But it was a very difficult time. It was, it was a difficult time leading up to what I dared to do, and then during that process, it was not easy. But so be it. That's leadership.
That's leadership. So you leave the herd. An opportunity must have come up, and after your 13 years there. And what was that opportunity, and where did you go?
I went to UC Berkeley, and the chancellor came over here at 2 a.m. I think he did, in a chartered plane to meet me on the tarmac and to talk to me about his problems. And quite simply, it was that he had a major benefactor that wanted to build a museum or two off the campus of Berkeley, which, for Berkeley, that's big stuff. I mean, they're so, inner controlling. And so he queried me as to whether I would take the plunge and help him get his community of faculty, particularly, to support this notion of having a satellite, center of sorts off campus for what would be two purposes: an art, science, and culture museum, and a museum that this particular benefactor wanted to establish that would then become a gift of over 300 classic automobiles to the benefit of the university. And so it'll be a major automobile museum, right, along with a separate museum of art, science, and culture. So I was intrigued and took the challenge and went over there with my wife and two of our children whom were living at home still, and we took on it, and the automobile museum was actually in construction when I showed up, and then I was responsible for the development of the Art, Science, and Cultural Museum, which was immediately contiguous, adjacent to the other museum in a beautiful, beautiful neighborhood of the Berkeley area. And so we developed that. And of course, it didn't just come. I mean, it came because I had to then create these relationships with, you know, all these different departments and, you know, different sciences, and the library division, and
What was your
arts.
title?
What's that?
What was your title? What was your
Oh,
job?
I was director and CEO of an educational institute. So we created this not-for-profit that it's called the Baring Hoffman Educational Institute, and that was the corpus. That was the entity that took responsibility for both of these institutions, as well as for another piece of property that that the university owned. That was a paleontological site. And so I had to work for that period of time at getting the faculty and other supporters of the university to embrace this notion of having this offsite, this away from the university campus, their first ever kind of series of edifices. So it was quite the undertaking, but I didn't have to see an undertaker after all. I lived through it, and we did it, and it still is thriving. And so
how long were you there?
Just shy of 4 years.
Yeah.
And then I got a call from the governor of this state to see if I would come back to it. And that was on Christmas Eve of a particular year, and direct and try to save the Museum of Northern Arizona, which hadn't paid a bill in 10 months or something like that.
Who was the governor at that time?
That was Babbitt.
Yeah, it was Babbitt. And so they were struggling mightily.
Oh yeah, they were underwater. They had no hope for thinking that such a historic and important collection and campus could again thrive. Yeah. And a good friend of mine, whom you certainly know of him, if you don't know him personally, he's now of course deceased. Ned Danson was its founding, not founding, because the founder was, of course, the Colton family, but he was their selected director for a long time. Ned Danson was their director.
Yeah,
and of
Ted
course,
Danson's father.
Right. And of course, Ted lived there. And so anyhow, my wife agreed to let's go for another one. And so we moved to Flagstaff, and I was director there for just shy of 8 years. Mm-hmm. And we made every concerted effort to do something that no other institution anywhere had yet tried. And, they had 400 acres, and, they, as I said, hadn't paid a bill in a long time, and staff wasn't being properly cared for. And it was pathetic. And so I created what I call an intergenerational museum campus. And I along with a wonderful educator in the community of Flagstaff, I built a charter public high school on the museum campus, which was the first anywhere in this country. And it was, and still is, called the Flagstaff Arts and Leadership Academy. And I can share more about the kind of student we had there and so forth, and even why it was created. But that was the first of the intergenerational components of the campus that I built. And then I built a senior living center, full continuum care facility, and 77 independent living bungalows in the woods, and that's 100% filled at all times today. And we didn't in northern Arizona. There wasn't a senior living center at all.
And
And
did
this
you
was the
see
first.
that as an opportunity to get the museum funds and because that's, clearly a dichotomy from the museum to have a senior living facility. So how did you recognize to say, okay, well, this is part of the museum goals?
Well, the biggest thing that the museum under my leadership needed to see happen was that it be seen as more community centered, more community involved.
Yeah.
And so whether it be the high school, because at that time, none of the 3 high schools was providing any kind of stimulation to young students who were with that, type of brain that, they express themselves differently. They were artistic. And so, so many of them were being truant. And in fact, we lived in a location of Flagstaff where I drove by every day, the one mall of the community. And I kept seeing more and more kids stacking up there every day.
Yeah.
And they were back in that era, they were very expressive. They had different color hair and long, and they had their long coats, and, they were just very artistic. And so I stopped there one day and began to visit with them and get to know them. And, again, I learned the story of the fact that they were dropping out of school because there was nothing in it for them. And so I called up the superintendent of schools, who came to Flagstaff literally the same day I moved there to head up museum. He moved there to head up the school district. And I said, Doc, what are we doing for truancy in this community? And he said, not a darn thing. I said, well, we need to address it. And so that's what was really the impetus for me then to reach out to the teacher of the year for the state of Arizona. Coincidentally, that year was a high school teacher in this art department, but had to do other things now because art was so diluted. And I reached out to her, introduced myself, asked her if I could meet with her. So we met on a Saturday morning over a muffin, and 3.5 hours later, we had designed on napkins, I guess you might say, this whole idea of this Flagstaff Arts and Leadership Academy. And that was the springtime of that year. And you had to go through all of the legal business with the state and everything. And lo and behold, with even the construction of all of the buildings and, everything, we opened up in the fall with, 250, 300 kids. It was just tremendous. And it created a whole different atmosphere for all my colleagues at the museum, needless to say. Our biologists and anthropologists and other of the scientific strength of that community, those same people taught in the classroom those particular courses. And then, of course, I had just built a whole new addition to the Museum of Northern Arizona, a theater, a multi-use environment that became their auditorium and theater and reception area and so forth. And that became the opportunity then for the students to be able to do their performances in that particular environment, because again, so much of their curriculum, though of course it all had to match the state curriculum, included the arts of performing as well as visual.
Right.
And it was terrific. And then when I built the Senior Living Center, my whole idea there was to encourage as many retired scholars, people of education and different disciplines to reside here from all over the globe. We marketed it all over the globe. And then for them to continue their particular interests by contributing to to this mentorship role with these students.
Yeah, that's a very genius way to do that. That's interesting.
It was a sampler for how other now institutions, including ASU, have followed suit
Yeah,
subsequently.
I knew they had done something like that with
Oh
professors.
yeah, but so every student was assigned a resident of the senior center to mentor and to be mentored by.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And then we had all these contributors that would, volunteer their services in the school. And then the kids, of course, did their programming often in the center where I had this wonderful, program facility of the lodge. And it was just terrific for everyone. It was a growth opportunity for whether it was a senior or whether it was a high school kid.
Right.
And then we had numerous historic buildings of the campus that were on the historic register, and I restored all of those again thanks to a wonderful.
So, like the Colton House is one of those. Yeah,
Colton House and all of the outbuildings, and
that has that wonderful Ed Mel in it.
What's that?
It has that wonderful Ed Mel that they.
Oh
did.
yeah, over the fireplace. Over the fireplace. Yeah. He did that for us.
I wondered if you might have been involved in that. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course it's such a when I was offered or asked to accept the job, among other things, they had that building and that whole part of their campus for sale. And I said I would not come unless that for sale sign's taken down. I said, this is one of the most important historic buildings in the state of Arizona.
Yep, it is.
I will do my darnest to see that the right thing happens to it, because it was in disrepair. It really needed renovation. And thankfully, a wonderful patron came forward and was my partner in crime on all of this. And she funded and was integrally responsible for so much of the renovation or restoration of the properties which I speak of. And then we built a residential neighborhood too called Coyote Springs that again was all with the idea in mind that these new residents would themselves become, and every home was $1 million or greater value back then. Now they're $2, $3, and $4 million of value. And I met with, of course, any person who was considering buying land to then build their home, that they would have a very, very special relationship with the museum. And of course, it was always with the thought that one or more of them would have the means over time to be a major funder of the institution also.
Yeah.
And of course, they had to, from an architectural standpoint, they had to follow the architectural requirements that clearly reflect our sensitivity and responsibility to the original indigenous material of the region that the Colton House was built with. So every property, if you were to drive through there today, every property reflects that.
Yeah, I've driven there and I've seen it. Yeah.
Yeah,
they're beautiful. Yeah, I've stayed over at the
It is
Colton
pretty.
a few times. It's a wonderful museum, and I really
it's special. It really is.
For those people who have not been to the Museum of Northern Arizona, you are missing a gem of a museum. And I highly recommend people to go and visit it and be a part of it. And, it's one of the things that we like to support, that museum. I think it's one of our great gems. And how long were you at that museum?
Just shy of 8 years.
Yeah.
And then I got a call from Lani Ali, Muhammad Ali's wife one day. And
how did she find you? How did she come about?
I think she found me through a headhunter that knew that I was doing these wild and crazy things on different campuses, and knew that I was different from a lot in terms of what I was always thinking of, social consciousness, of seeing that our kind of institution really be much more part of that community that I speak of. And to try to push that button every way I could in that institution that I directed. And so she called and she asked, she wasn't looking for a director because she didn't have any idea what was to be directed.
Right.
She asked if I would come to Berrien Springs, Michigan, where they had their estate, which was Al Capone's
Old home.
old home, and meet with her and her husband over a weekend and just, explore what could be. Her interest was to see that whatever it is, that it would extend his legacy, not in any way to put him on the top of a mountain somewhere, but for others to benefit from the individual whom he developed into,
Right.
And to help society in a big way. But again, no idea what the real possibilities would be, if at all. So I said, sure, I would love that opportunity. So I flew there and met with them for the whole weekend. And
what was that like? What was that like to meet Muhammad Ali for the first time? For the very first time?
It was incredulous. I had seen him fight. My father and I had seen him fight when he was a Golden Gloves boxer, before his excelling to the achievements that he realized. So he was young then, and I was a bit younger than he. But I can tell you that I've had a lot. I've been really, really fortunate to meet with 4 different presidents, and a lot of other relationships with people globally. But this takes the cake. I mean, it does, because he was so personable and so genuine. And I'm not saying others haven't been that way too, but it was just one of those moments. I'll give you and your viewers one of just, I could sit here all day and share example after example as we traveled all over the globe. So the first time for which I'm meeting with them, I'm sitting on a couch in their office, and he's sitting to my left on the same couch, and Lonnie is sitting across from me and from us. And again, and this is the honest God too, he didn't know who I was. I mean, Lonnie set this up, and some guy was going to come and dream along with them as to what might ever happen beyond his life. I never provided them resume, or I wasn't looking for a job. I was loving my work at M&A. I was there to just think along with him. So 5 or 10 minutes only into the conversation, he turns to me. And again, remember, he has Parkinson's, but it hadn't developed to the degree that we all saw it ultimately did. And of course, during much of my tenure with him, that evolution happened. But he turned to me and he said, "You're a Capricorn." And I said, "Yeah, I am." And that was it. He just stopped, and then we started continuing talking. And about, I don't know how many more minutes into, my expressing myself on whatever it was, or our conversation, led him to then turn to me and said, "And you were born on my birthday." And I said, "I don't know." When's your birthday? I didn't know. And lo and behold, it was January 17th. And I said, "Yes, you're right." And to this hour, I promise you, Lonnie promises me, he never, ever, ever knew that before, what he felt in terms of how our personalities were similar, and what he gained from my mannerisms, or whatever the heck they might have been. And so from that moment forward, it was a shoe-in that, these 2 Capricorns born on the same day, we're going to somehow figure this thing out, and whatever it is, we were going to make it happen. And so we had a wonderful balance of the weekend, and a real sit down time of just exploring possibilities as to what might become of an idea they had, or an idea that we were developing. And so I crystallized an idea that that then subsequently became the Muhammad Ali Center, International Center in Louisville. And he chose Louisville because, of course, it's where he was raised. And despite the fact that Chicago wanted it, Washington, D.C. wanted it, New York wanted it, I mean, they all came to us wanting it to be there.
Right.
He would not budge because he gave, total appreciation to the community that he was raised in, that allowed him to ultimately become whom he had. And so he wanted to return that favor. And so no matter what the values would be, have been different, had it been elsewhere, financial or audience sizes or whatever, he was stuck in his, and rightly so, in his stance that it would be in Louisville that we developed this. And so I subsequently, some months later, they asked me to join them, and I joined them. And of course, I was the first employee. I was beginning from scratch, literally. And we went on to raise, I don't know, 110 million or something like that to be able to pull off the idea that we created. And it's a jewel. I mean, it, to this hour, is, for people that experience it, is exactly how we would want them to experience it. And it's using Muhammad's. I asked Muhammad one day to give me the 5 most important characteristics or values that have guided his life. And remember, and I don't wish for your audience to think that he's a perfect human being. He is the first to admit that he has had a lot of warts, a lot of things that at certain times in his life, he didn't make good judgment about.
Right.
Whether it was a treatment toward women or, so forth and so on. So I asked him, give me 5. So he gave me the 5. I'm just like that. He gave me the 5. And we literally created this institution utilizing those 5 values or characteristics that were the most important for him. But again, it's not to be a story or an experience only about him. It's to cause for you and me to think of our own strengths, our own values, our own characteristics that we have to further develop, or that we have to improve upon, or that we have to celebrate. And so all the different ways, in the interactive manner that this center, which is 6 stories, that we do that, really is all to affect people's lives, to change people at any age.
Do you remember
And
the five things that he gave you?
Do I what?
Remember the 5 things that he said were important?
Boy, I certainly should. At age 76, I will use that as an excuse, maybe, but maybe I can remember them. Oh God, this is terrible. I mean, I've built, this entire institution. So they'll all come to mind. Respect, dedication, spirituality. Oh gosh, the other 2 will hopefully come to mind before our conversation ends. I'm sorry, but each one is thematically, what is
Right.
represented in everything for which you would experience in the center. And then, of course, we have multiple meeting rooms because it's a place where conflict management is managed in a professional manner. So whether it was countries that used the center to bring people with diverse viewpoints together to learn how to understand one another and respect one another differently, just like Muhammad would do all over the globe.
Right.
We do it in the center. And so there's a whole programmatic side beyond the experiential that is, a very, very important dimension of the center itself. So it's not a museum in the traditional sense at all. It's not just seeing his gloves and his robes and
Right.
that kind of a thing. It's
So
all
those
about,
components are there, right? Those
all
things,
about personal development.
yeah, but those things are there too, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
the
Oh yeah.
artifacts and all that, the history. I mean, yeah, such an
Sure.
interesting
Oh,
history.
it's all there. Oh
Did
yeah.
you guys, did you and Muhammad ever have a talk about the Vietnam War? Because you're kind of on the opposite ends of the spectrum to some extent. I mean, he's a conscientious objector, you know, it really focused who he was. Your brothers are in Vietnam, and I just wondered, did you ever have that conversation?
Yeah, we had the conversation, but I
Yeah.
mean, it was not as though we were in opposition to one another.
No, you both
It
had,
was
you both were,
respectfully
yeah,
conversing about
yeah,
our. I mean, I had to share with him, the kind of experiences that I was having in law
right,
enforcement
right,
because of the war
right,
and because of people like him whom were protesting and da 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 da.
right.
So, yeah, I mean, we didn't, go quiet on that. We talked about it, but it was never with Muhammad. He's what we call colorblind. Firstly, I mean, to think that he had me in Anglo be responsible for what I took
Right.
on
Right.
was in itself, all the way until I left the place, hugely controversial.
Yeah, I bet.
But so be it. I stood tall and, saw that the proof is in the pudding. And, what we created is more than what he ever imagined. And I accepted the challenge. I mean, there were this endless occasions for which I was challenged. Why a member of the African American community is not in
Right.
the position which you are assuming. So every director subsequent has been African American, I might add. But for the time and for their particular need and for what I was able to do. So, for instance, and this is not a story told to many, but among other things, I said that I was going to see that as much of this $100 million building was going to be built with the hands and the spirit and the pride of members of the African American community, be it of Louisville or of the country, wherever their specialty
Right.
comes from. So, make a long story short, I publicly announced that I would see that, this would be the first and foremost greatest goal. And so, out of respect for the African American community, well, I heard it from every major player in the state of Kentucky that is not what you do. That is not what we do. That is not how the university has been built. That is not how government has built their buildings, and all of this kind of stuff.
Right.
And I said, okay, I hear you, but I accept the challenge. So what I started doing for the next about 18 months, every Friday, I brought submarine sandwiches into a African-American community center of a particular church on the west side of town, and invited, the different disciplines in construction to
Right.
join me at talking about how can we get to this objective, and what will it take, and what bankers do we have to line up, and what insurance companies do we have to line up with to be able to bond the project, and da 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 da. So, make a long story short, we ended up, I would say, at least 70% of the entire building, whether it's all of the iron came from Tennessee in a African-American owned factory, whether it was, all of the siding that came from another African-American owned entity somewhere, whether it was, all the pride that was seen by the plumbers and the painters and, all of the other kind of wonderful people representing their particular specialty. it happened, and it just is a jewel of a building. It's just state of the art. It's a gorgeous building, but it is more so a point of pride for their peoples of the community. And I hired, for instance, the project manager was an African American star football player at West Point, and of course he went on to become an Army man himself, and then went into the discipline of construction and construction management. And I brought him into town, and he was my man. And he managed the day-to-day construction of the building. And to this hour, he's still, of course, a wonderful friend. So it was this kind of engagement, no different with the Native Americans, that caused for us to accomplish the goal.
Yeah, I think it set you up perfectly, having worked at the Herd and also the Museum of Northern Arizona, but especially the Herd, to be able to culturally be sensitive and go, okay, I get it, and I understand it more than others. I mean, it was actually a perfect pick that they got you, and probably they did their research and said, okay, this is what this guy was able to do at the Herd, and also, with the museum restructuring with NAGPRA and things like that. I'm sure they looked at that stuff. So you were ideally selected in the sense that you'd gone through it. You knew what you were up against when you took on that position, I'm sure, to some extent. I mean, you never can know until you get in there and people start giving you trouble. But, I have to believe you went in with wide open eyes, knowing, okay, there's going to be some fairly significant pushback that I'm going to have to deal with.
I knew it. You're right. No differently than I've known at most any other institution that I've had the privilege to help lead.
Yeah.
That I'm accepting of those realities, and as a leader, you embrace it, and you never in leadership, nothing's easy. I mean, it's something where you are definitely causing for people to respect your stance and your ability to take an idea and develop it, and not independently. And I emphasize that none of what I'm talking about has been independent. It's been with a lot of engagement of a lot of wonderful people, including the architectural group and the construction team, and all these others, and my own staff that I built. I didn't have a single colleague, until 6 months later. I'll tell you, and all of you, a quick story, and that is, I don't know how many of you know about the Algonquin Hotel in New York, Algonquin Hotel, but it's a hotel where all the literary artists in the 30s and 40s and 50s would come with their work under their armpit.
Yep.
And sit around tables in that hotel and get people's responses to their particular creation. So I thought, I'm going to use that same hotel for the same reason. So I hosted numerous meetings, bringing in the top educators from border to border of this country, the top museum designers, the top cross-cultural scholars and practitioners, and brought them all together at different times. I mean, brought different groups of them together at different times in the Algonquin. And that was sort of, what I called my charrette time, my creative time of getting all this other input. And it was just so terrific, an experience for me to have such resourcefulness, willing to share their ideas with Muhammad. Muhammad was there, of course, and Lonnie was there. And then, that subsequently really resulted in the belief that this institution could be built. And then I started to, of course, develop a staff that could support this concept, and ultimately help me create it.
And so how long were you at the Institute?
Just shy of 8 years.
8 years. So, and you basically built it from the ground up.
Built it and managed it for 2 years, until I felt that it was at a point where, the responsibilities could be passed on. And so, yes, I built it and opened it and took responsibility for its successful launch.
That had to be a very interesting job too, because it's very high profile. You're going to be meeting with all sorts of interesting people.
Yes, and I promised Muhammad and Lonnie, and to this day, I would never break that promise. But the experiences which we had with people that you would expect that we would have reason to encounter with and expect for them to support us and didn't.
Yeah.
There was more that didn't than that did. And you would be amazed, but I'm not gonna let that out of the bag as to what surprised us most or whom surprised us the most. But I'm going to tell you this because it's fair to do so for his sake and out of gratitude. One person whom was just a jewel through, having to raise $100 million isn't easy. And I wanted to do it fast because I didn't know what Muhammad's future would be. And I wanted him to experience it in its totality, which of course he subsequently did for, a couple of years post our opening. But Bob Costas was just a jewel. I mean, he would fly with me anywhere that I would ask him to meet with, this athlete or this particular individual whom he had a relationship with. And of course, Muhammad would oftentimes go with us also. But Bob was just a superb friend to Muhammad. Firstly, of course, he did this for Muhammad. Of course he did. And he didn't get paid one dime and he never got reimbursed for anything. He was just willing to help Muhammad, reach this goal. And I'm so appreciative of him. And as I am a number of other such people whom you would, Jim Carrey, for instance, would you ever think Jim Carrey, as crazy and wild a Canadian guy that he is? Lo and behold, one Friday night, I'm at a downtown Louisville arts, market, and I get a phone call, and lo and behold, I sat up on a concrete walkway of a residential property, and took the call, and it was Jim Carrey. And I had reached out to his people earlier, and and lo and behold, he wanted to visit about the center, and we talked on that particular night more about it one-on-one, and he sent me $1 million check.
It doesn't surprise me. He's a very serious guy.
Very serious guy.
Yeah, he's a very serious guy. I mean, there's the one component of you see in the public, realm of what he is. But I've had the pleasure of meeting him once in an intimate situation, and I can tell he's a serious guy. He has serious thoughts. Clearly he gave you money for something he believed in, and that doesn't surprise me at all. Yeah.
And there are other people like that equally were generous and thoughtful and again, gave it out of their love for Muhammad.
Yeah, that's cool.
But there were so many whom you would have expected to do so that didn't. And it's just sad that they didn't, but so be it. We got to where we needed to go.
And so how did you go to your next step? So tell us about that.
To the museum, the Scottsdale Museum of the West.
So I don't know if that's exactly where you went after the Muhammad place, or because
it is.
Yeah,
it is. Yeah.
So who called you, or how did you go? I'm going back to Scottsdale. That's my home.
There was a headhunter in San Francisco that called me about this opportunity, and then she introduced to me in just conversation, the names of certain people that were involved in this desire to build someday a museum that they had tried to do, 3 or 4 times before and failed. And I knew some of those people, of course, because of my longtime residency in Arizona. So I was thinking that the return to the state that 2 of our 3 children were still residing would be good for my wife, who was bedridden by then, and myself. And so I said I'd happily meet with the leadership of this thing, this new organization, that they possibly were going to try something to make it happen this time. So I came out here and met with Jim Bruner and 13 other of these trustees that were part of this dream team. And, I just thought that this was the right time and the right place to likely end my career.
Right.
At taking on another last such challenge.
And this is a museum that they have been trying, the city of Scottsdale have been trying to build for a very long time, right? What's the back?
Yeah, they tried 3 or so times before, and each time it failed for different reasons. And it was a dream of a what they always was known as the lifetime mayor, Herb Drinkwater, who by that time was deceased.
Yes.
But it was his desire 30-something years ago. In fact, when I was director of the herd, he would come down in his Jeep and pick me up and drive me out to North Scottsdale. And North Scottsdale, for those that might be listeners of and know the region, anything north of Shea Boulevard on Scottsdale Road was all desert.
Right.
And we were driving through those different areas looking for such property. And so it's been a long time desire for the city to have such an entity that focused about the American West. And so in a sense, it closed a circle for me because I had been introduced to that, 20 something years prior. So anyhow, we took the opportunity or responsibility or challenge and moved back home.
What year was that you moved to start doing this?
That would have been 2008, January of 2008. Yeah. And of course that, a month later, the recession hit big time.
Yeah.
So for the next nearly 2 years, we were in a silent mode. We almost had to whisper what we wanted to do because, the social needs of Scottsdale or any other community were so great with the recession that the last thing anyone would want to publicly talk about is develop a new edifice.
Right.
So what I did during that 2-year period with the city's help, they gave me 23 different sites, properties that they owned throughout the city.
Right.
As possible sites for this museum. And so I analyzed each of those sites, selected 4 of them, and then I went to an architectural group who weren't the ones that ended up becoming, nor did I expect them to, the architect for our final building, but at no cost, because we didn't have any money. Right. At no cost, along with the construction group, they worked with me on the design of 4 very different from each other buildings for these different sites, because the sites each, because of their size and location, presented a different opportunity for us in terms of the kind of facility that we could build on any one of those different sites. So we designed, a very conceptual but pretty artistically attractive. Different buildings and different other outdoor amenities for each of these different properties. And at that same time, the site for which we ultimately were fortunate to do what we have done was in a lawsuit. So there was no confidence that the city was going to win that lawsuit. So the assumption wasn't that is our site. We had to consider any of these others too. So that's what I did during that quiet time. and then we subsequently got out of the recession enough at least to begin to develop concept and raise the funding that needed to be raised with the help of the city council, and the support of the city council was terrific. And the support of city staff has been to this day wonderful. And, the institution has gone from another idea to reality and to real, I think, value here in the West about the West.
Yeah, and it is funded and was paid for by the city of Scottsdale.
No, we created have been. I'm no longer, but I was the director and CEO of the not-for-profit entity called Scottsdale Museum of the West.
Yes.
So we are the responsible entity for the daily operation of the institution and all costs thereof of operating the entity. The arrangement we made with the city was that the city would provide the land and would build the building, would fund the building. We, of course, managed the building, but the building's development, but they would fund that. And then for the first 5 years, they would match dollar for dollar up to $400,000 a year. The income we derived from donations, not from membership, not from admission, but from outright support for the operations of the institution. So for the first 5 years, we were able to match that commitment, of having the private sector support minimally $400,000 a year of the operation, a lot more than that for each year, I might add too. But so each year of the first 5 years, the city supported us to the tune of $400,000.
And what year is the museum now? How long have they been open? I can't remember.
We just started on the 15th of January as our 7th year of operation.
That's amazing.
And we've balanced every budget.
And then I think one of the persons that's, has to be talked about because of their pivotal role in the museum is Tim Peterson and what has been able to bring to the museum. And maybe you just want to describe a little bit of some of the things that he's, been involved with. I know right now he's got an amazing collection of Curtis that he's put together. That's without doubt the finest that's the finest show I've ever seen of Curtis, and the largest without a doubt.
And your Maynard Dixon show was the finest Maynard Dixon show ever too. So we've had two evers. There's no ands, ifs, or buts about that one, Mark, either. Tim Peterson has been just a jewel of a friend to the institution and a personal friend for that matter, ever since the friendship began. And it began by simply a telephone call from him one day that he reached out to me and said, I hear that you're thinking of doing something in Scottsdale. What's your idea? So I shared with him what the concept of what we wanted to someday do. And that conversation was repeated several times. I did not know whom I was speaking with. I didn't know his name.
Yep.
He never disclosed his name. He never disclosed what part of the country he was calling from.
Yeah.
And so we had this long distance friendship without us knowing one another very, very well from the standpoint of identity, at least. And then I finally was invited to meet him in person in Boston and begin to appreciate the strength of his passion for the region of the American West and what subsequently, of course, became what he amassed in terms of the extraordinary personal collection.
Yeah.
historic and contemporary work. And so, from literally the day we opened the museum, when we had the Lewis and Clark exhibition, which was his collection of Charlie Fritz's work, to Courage and Culture's exhibition, which is featured also currently along with the Curtis, to a number of other collections that we've been able to rotate. He's just been an extraordinary contributor to what has become a institution that has got a lot of recognition and success to date. And I attribute so much of it to him, and because of him, to other lenders whom, like yourself, whom have supported the museum and continue to support it in this manner, because we never thought we would be an institution that would have our own collection. We always thought we would be very reliant on people like yourself and Tim and others, and we still are. But we also have been seemingly seen as worthy for some really wonderful collections to also be gifted to us. So that's happened.
Like the one behind you.
Yes, exactly. And that's only half of his collection that we're getting. In fact, we're going to be doing a major exhibit of the 75 works that I just picked up a couple of months ago at latest. And we'll be featuring many of those works in the near future in that gallery. And
yeah, that's one of the finest collections of Hopi pottery that you're going to see anywhere, without a doubt.
Yeah.
It's funny. I actually, when I'm in Scottsdale, if nothing else, just to go look at that collection is worth it to me.
Yeah, well, that's nice to hear. And it was so important when I met this Dr. Alan Cook, who himself and his wife amassed this collection. To me, it was so important, as you can appreciate from everything we've been talking about, to have a Native American major collection represented always in this institution, to show to our 22 tribes of this state, for instance, our respect for them and our celebration of their historic and contemporary achievements. And so, this collection was really important to this young institution, to have that kind of opportunity for acknowledging the contributions of the living culture and their ancestors. And of course, Abe Hayes and his terrific collection, and John Coleman, and was gifted to us from Howie Alper, and the wonderful other collections. There were Dr. Bernard Strickland's collection of Western film posters, some 7,000 of those,
which is an amazing collection
we acquired with the university. We both own that collection together. No, there have been numerous wonderful gifts that have now been generously shared for the long haul, to see that they will always be available for future generations. That's our.
So does that kind of change the way the museum really was structured? I mean, originally it was, we'll get loans, we won't have our own collection, we'll get them for other people. But now you've really kind of developed some major collections. And so do you look at it, or does the museum look at it a little differently now that they are building, their own permanent museum collections?
Well, the answer is yes, because many of these collections are worthy of sharing with the public, and yet, of course, there are many private collections that are out there that we would love to either develop an exhibition around or have them be included in a special exhibit that would it be appropriate. I will say this, that we have an expansion plan for the building that would help address this feature of our featuring a few major collections that would be as important for study as they would for exhibition. Mm-hmm. So it's what I call an open storage system, where if you were to experience it, you would be afforded the opportunity to see it all,
Yeah.
whether or not it's in exhibition format or whether it's in storage.
Mhm.
It would be accessible to you. And that's our concept for what is a 30,000 square foot addition someday. And that would allow us to take a few of these major collections, including the likes of the Curtis, for instance, and have it be reason for people from all over the globe, whenever it is that they choose to come to our museum, they would always have the opportunity to have interface with a few of those significant collections.
Yeah. Well, that's a significant one, I can tell you.
Yeah, it certainly will. So is your Dixon collection. And, there's just so much. And like you said some time ago now in this conversation, we're not just talking about the beauty of the art. We're talking about, the real meaningfulness of the work itself and
Right.
the artist himself or herself and the period of time in which the work was done. And, all these other things that people can learn and be inspired by and show greater respect for the artist or the time or the place because of what storytelling allows for the institution to do with the visitor. And that's really what we are. We are a storyteller. And we use the wonderful work of your collection, the wonderful work of Curtis, the wonderful work of all the other collections that we've been privileged to be able to be stewards of in different ways. We want people to learn so much and to be affected in a very hopefully positive way by what they experience with us. And hopefully, as I say, it's merely a gateway. It's merely the beginning of then for them to want to learn more and to experience more and to go out to visit a tribe that, a reservation that a particular artist might have himself or herself been once residents of or still are, or, whatever else it is that they could experience about the West. We would love that to be, a result of their introduction or their experience at the museum.
Yeah. And your museum is really more in line with kind of how the Autry has done it, incorporating both cowboy, Western, contemporary Western, contemporary indigenous and native antiquities, all of it into one bundle. So you get the whole, it's the whole West. It's not just like the herd, which is really just native, it's the whole kit and caboodle, so to speak.
That's correct. Yeah, that's a good analogy. Yeah.
And that's one of the things I really love about that museum. There's a lot of things I love about the museum. I love the architecture. I love the different exhibits that they have, the friendliness of the staff, and the collections are immense. And there's really nothing like it that I can think of anywhere. I mean, the closest I would say is the Booth Museum, honestly, in Cartersville, that has that sense to it. But this museum is critically important. And I always said, I wish it was in Tucson, because I would visit it all the time. Not that I don't love my own art museum here. I do.
Oh, of course you do.
And I support it. And I'm pushing, in fact, for them to do more like you have done and add more, indigenous stuff. And Jeremy has done that. They've made a room that is now for just the indigenous arts, which is fantastic. And how do you think it's been received, the museum, in your community?
Slowly.
Yeah.
Slowly.
And why do you think that is?
Well, one of the reasons is, in all honesty, when we opened the museum, we'd had no money to market the institution.
Right.
We were penniless, and so, we didn't have what you typically would have in any institution of the others that we've discussed today that are new institutions that I helped create. We had major budgets to promote the newness of such an entity. We didn't have anything. So it had to, from literally this day one, be almost word of mouth.
Yeah.
We had to be relying on to get the word out for us. And I certainly would never, ever recommend or encourage any institution that's new to not have a sizable marketing and promotion budget before they open. Is what we call pre-opening expense. Leading up to its opening, you create that excitement and anticipation, and then you have that crescendo period once you do open, and then we've just from the get-go, we've not had the marketing financial support necessary to give it what it's worth in terms of the kind of marketing emphasis. So that's really been our handicap. And beyond that, I mean, anyone like you're just expressing, which I immensely appreciate, anyone that experiences it comes out of it, with amazement. I mean, they just, and like you said, literally from the Leeds Gold building that reflects our conscientiousness to, indigenous materials of this region, to anything else about the edifice, people really are getting what we had hoped they would from it, but it has not yet received the kind of visitor response that it deserves.
Yeah. And now you have stepped down, you've done your duty. You're partially working there, I guess. I don't know exactly all the roles. I know James Burns has taken over as the director. He's a new hire. He's just been there for probably 6 months or so. And what's your role, your own role, other than I know you're a cheerleader for sure, a big one.
Well, I'm helping the board as they've asked me to in the expansion possibilities and in collection development.
Yes.
And those areas are predominantly what I've agreed to be helpful to them as they have asked me to be. And I'm not any longer responsible for the day-to-day operations of the institution. Yeah. And that is what I asked for. And of course, I had the privilege to do the national search for this new position called an executive director position. That's what Dr. Burns holds now. And so that is now in force as of a few months ago. And so I'm available as needed.
Yes. Well, I don't see you as a man who retires. Just don't see that. I mean, even if you tried, I don't see how you could. Your personality and your sense of wonderment doesn't go away. So,
well, one of my brothers said, it's not retirement for you, it's refirement.
Yeah.
So I hope that I can refire by helping the institution in these areas that I just described to further develop itself.
Yeah. Well, you've done this for 50 plus years now,
Yeah, 53.
Yeah. So what do you have to say to those individuals who might be wanting to enter this field, or maybe you've even started? Any words of wisdom or pearls that you can give them, on the journey that they may or may not have?
Well, that's a very good question to maybe end our conversation.
Yep.
I would encourage them to think as to whether or not, firstly, they are leaders or followers, and any leader needs a follower. So I'm not suggesting that followers are as a young professional, wrong for them to get behind a leader. We need followers as we lead these kinds of institutions. So they need to really determine what their strengths are and what their real interests are in this field in the first place. So they have to assess their own abilities and then figure out within our field, what realm of direction, what their interests suggest that they would be directed. In other words, is it curatorial? Is it education? Is it administration? Is it marketing? Whatever those particular fields are within the industry, they have to come to some, in a sense, conclusion themselves as to where they want to continue to develop and learn and ultimately make contribution to the institution or the field. So I think it's a matter of self-assessing their own abilities and interests, and what really motivates them. What are they people that have those kind of leadership strengths that suggest that it's persistence and it's a to-do spirit, and all of those kind of strengths that a leader must possess. So I hope that they would always think that no matter what age they are, whether they're newly into the field or just getting out of college and are thinking of getting into it, that they mentor with someone whom could be a supporter and a person whom would encourage them and, in a sense, direct them. I think any of us, I've had it all my adult life to this day, people whom I have been so inspired by and dependent upon their encouragement and advice, counsel. And I would hope that young men and women would embrace other people whom have had experiences that may well line up with what they over time may themselves have.
Yeah.
So I think mentorship is really important.
I agree. Yeah. If you can find a real mentor, whether it's as a museum director or as an art gallerist or as an artist, that can really help cut through the red tape that you're going to have to deal with and maybe give you a real insight to what it's like. It's easy to go in thinking, oh, I'll do this and that. But, when you're sitting in Louisville and the construction guys say, you're not doing this because we don't like it, it's helpful to be able to call someone or talk to someone or to have the experience to know how to handle that situation. You can't just do it on your own.
Very true.
Yeah. And somehow you have managed to navigate a whole lot of different roles and a lot of different institutions. I think all that gives you experience that other people don't have. And I would say that's something that sets you apart, is because you've had to do these, or you haven't had to, but you wanted to do these very disparate type of jobs, that each one is a building block that allows you to be just that much more intuitive on how to go about doing a job.
Thank you for that. I would lastly probably wish to say, in response to your question, what I would encourage young men and women to think is, two things. One is that it may well not be a field that they, direct themselves to get into necessarily, but it may well be a field for which they contribute in a different way. In every museum in this country, and other countries for that matter, relies so heavily on volunteers. And so if you ultimately are a scholar, let's just say in a particular business realm, maybe what you have learned and are doing in your business can be helpful in our not-for-profit or, in the role of volunteer work in a museum.
Yeah.
So there's some direct ways and there's some indirect ways you might be able to still contribute to the institution. So I think that's it's critically important for your listeners to understand that you don't have to be a professional to necessarily make a significant contribution to our kind of an institution. We need it from all different resourcefulness.
Yeah, I think Tim Peterson is a good example of that.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
And many others like him have made institutions around this country become what they have.
Yeah.
Because of their interests, and they could well over time be people who have amassed, thanks to you and others that can help them,
Right.
wonderful collections, and now they can make these kinds of contributions, whether they be loan works or gifted works, to our kind of institutions.
Yeah. And then we all get to benefit from that.
Exactly. Yep.
Well, Michael, and I'll go call you that, even though I know I'm sure your mom called you that at some time.
Yeah, that's for sure.
But Mike, I really appreciate you taking
It's been delightful.
Let's see, care to guess how long we talked?
I'm afraid to even look at the clock, but I can tell you that my dog has been very patient nearby me here.
2.5 hours.
Oh, geez. You're going to have to edit this thing till.
We'll make it a 2-part. Michael will be a 2-part.
Well,
but I knew it would take.
For anyone who's having trouble sleeping, just view this. Is that what you're saying? Twice.
When I knew when we would do this podcast that it would be a long one. And the reason I knew it would be a long one is because you have a history. You have so much that you've lived. And, that doesn't just, you can't get that out in 30 minutes or an hour. It takes a while to unfold that story. And, it's a circuitous route that you took. And so I fully expected this could be one of the longest ones I ever had, just because you're an interesting person. And and I was correct.
No, you're the most interesting. And I thank you for the opportunity. And when I became Arizona history maker, they had me do an interview, but it certainly wasn't for 2.5 hours. Let me tell you. So you got more out of me than anyone else has dared to stay. And so it can be shown at my death. There it is. But anyhow, I sincerely thank you for the privilege to have this opportunity with you.
Well, the privilege was all mine. I've been wanting to do this for a couple of years now, and I'm glad you took the time to finally do it. So it's
when my hair was jet black, right?
No, it looked about the same the first time I saw you. But I think this institution that you helped start in Scottsdale is such an important museum that it's really critical for people to know about it. And it has to be on their top list. It's a great museum. It's one of the great places in America and the West. I mean, it's really
you helped to make it great, and you continue to in the different ways that you continue, and your wife, to support us, and we thank you for that.
All right, Mike. Thank you so much, and I will see the next time I am in town. I will give you a call, and if we can
look forward to that.
Have a lunch. That would be wonderful.
We'll do that, Mark. Thanks a lot.
Call Jim Ballinger and have him come over too.
Hey, now we're talking. We'll do it together. All right. Sounds great.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. See you.
It's been my privilege. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.